Welcome to the Code Maven channel. My name is Gábor Szabó, and in this video we are going to talk about context in Perl. Let me show you this code. So we can do the following code. Let's say I create a variable called time, and I call the function local time, which will get the local time, and then I can print it out using say. Okay, I have imported a set use 510, so I can use the say keyword, and now I can run this code. Okay, let me clear this out. Perl code.pl, and this is what I get. So I get the date in a nice reformatted way. But then you would say, okay, why do I need this variable here? I can just go ahead and call say on local time, right? So let's see what happens now. If I call run the program, well, I get this bunch of a long number basically that totally looks meaningless. Okay, what really happens is that I can basically call every function in either scalar or list context, or there's also something called the void context. And when I assign the call of the function to a scalar variable that was in scalar context, and local time returned this nicely formatted string, but when I called it in say, it was in actual list context. So what happens when if I assign the same thing to an array? This is again in list context, and then I can use the data dumper, let's say. Okay, it has the dumper function, and I can use that to print out what is in this variable, in this at. Okay, it's going to be easier than seeing just that long number. So let's run this code, and you can see that when I assign this value to the array, then I get this bunch of numbers. So these are almost the same. Actually, this is the same number, should be the same number, more or less. Just the time difference might be. And these are this is actually the same timestamp. The same timestamp is 46 seconds, 28 minutes. You can see 19 hour. That's the hour, and so on. Okay. So, but I don't want to go into that. What I want to talk about is how can you create a function that is also context aware, like this one. Okay, like the local time. And there are other functions in Perl that are also context aware. So let me just comment this out because I don't need this here anymore. And let's try to create a function. Cleverly, we can call it func and call it in various contexts. So first of all, I can call it just like this without assigning to anything. Then I can say it my $x equal to func. This is going to be in scalar context. Just I have to type it correctly. And I can do the same, just now assign it to an array. And this is going to be list context. Okay, so the function still doesn't do anything. Okay, so how can the function know in which context it's being called? There is a tool called wantarray that will return the context. Now wantarray can return actually 3 values. It can return undef. If it's in void context, it will return false, but so it's 0, I guess, in scalar context, and true in list context. So let's here inside, let's just print out whatever this returns. Okay, for now. Okay, if I run this code now, I get the first thing, I guess, is the undefined initialized value. Then there is this empty, I guess this is an empty string, and then it's 1. Okay, so let's see what exactly happens. My result. This is going to whatever the wantarray returns. In the first case, actually, easiest is probably this, right? So we can print out say defined result. Okay, and this is how we can check it. Perl code, and it says nothing because, well, actually what I should do is say defined, and then I say it's defined, otherwise say undef. Okay, so this is how I'm using the ternary operator, and if the defined result is true, then we're going to print out defined, otherwise I'll print out undef. Okay, so now if I call, you say in this case it's undef. In the second case, okay, if I call this one, it will say it's defined, and in the third case it will say it's defined. In both cases it's defined. But the question, what is this? So let's say if the dollar result is equal to the empty string, then just say empty string, otherwise print out the result itself. Okay, so this is what we're going to do. And if I call it in scalar context, so in this case I'm calling it in scalar context, then it says it's defined and it's in the empty string. And if I call it in list context, then I get that this is defined and the value is 1. So what we can do is we can write a function that based on this wantarray, we can know inside the function what is expected of us. And why it could be interesting? Because let's say this function does some long calculation in order to calculate all the expected return values here for the list. But if only one value is expected, then it doesn't need to calculate all the results. It can only calculate the most important one, and that might save time. Okay, and if it's called in void context, meaning that we don't care about the return value, then the function might just say, okay, there's no point in calling it in void context. So I could say something like this: if not defined, I could say even that one, right? Okay, don't call in void context. Okay, this is the message. And if not defined result, okay, or expected result, that could be a variable. So this is going to happen now. Okay, and let me just try it later on. And then we say if wantarray, or actually I don't need to, if result, okay, then we know that we are returning, let's say 2 and 3. So this is like we are going to return several values, and else we just return 42 because there's only one value that we are expected to return. So this is what will happen. So now if I call it this way, then it should raise an exception, right? It says don't call in void context. But if I call it in scalar context, well, actually maybe I would just put it here, say list, and here I just put here say scalar, so we'll know which one actually happens here. Okay, it says it's called in scalar context, and I could also say whatever is in X. Okay, and in X there should be 42, right? Because that's what we return in scalar context. And the last one here, the last experiment, is when I call it in list context, and then I enable the data dumper and use say data dumper on this same array, on this array. Okay, so we'll just see the content. Okay, and in this case it returned the both, so it's printed out list because it was called in list context, and return the values. So this is great, but there is something even better. Okay, there is a module called want, use want, that has a couple of possible functions. And let me now switch to the browser. So first of all, about wantarray, I have this article on the Perl Maven website, and you can see the various examples here. And there's another article I just wrote about the want module that has two interesting tools. One of them is this want function. Okay. The other one is that I have it down here is the how many function. So let me show you now just in the browser how it looks. The want function has a much more fine-tuned way of showing the what the user is expecting. So here is this function. This is this long function that can call the want function imported from the want module. Okay, let me enlarge this. So there is this want module and the want function in it, and then it can ask if what we are expecting when this function is called, whether it's in void context, or actually the order is not the right one, probably the list context, or scalar context. Okay, but there is also subcontext. So when we are expecting a scalar, there can be also it might be something more precise that you can expect. So here we can see that we can call it in different ways, and in different ways it will tell us that we are expected are different things. So this, when you saw it already, when we call it without assigning it to anywhere, that's just a void context. There's nothing special there. If I assign it to an array, it's list context. Nothing special yet there. If we assign to a scalar variable, just the scalar context. But if we, on the fly, when we call the function, access and behave as if it was returning a reference to an array, right? So basically what we wrote here is that we're dereferencing whatever array reference we got here. So by this code, we are actually telling that we assume that whatever this function is going to return is going to be a reference to an array, because this code can only be applied to a reference to an array. So if we call want inside and we check whether it's an array, then the want function will say yes, indeed, you were expecting a reference to an array. Okay. The same way, if I write this code, this means that we are expecting a reference to a hash returned by the function, and then indeed hash. So the want function will tell us that this is what the user is expecting. So this can make your code a lot more flexible, and based on what the user is expecting, you might return either a hash or a reference to a hash, or a list, or whatever is expected. The last example here is that when we take the func, whatever func returns, and apply the arrow and the parentheses, which means that we are actually expecting this to return a reference to a subroutine, an anonymous subroutine, let's say. Okay, and then we are calling, immediately invoking that function. In this case, the want is going to expect a code. So that if I call want code, that's going to be true, because that will say that whoever called this function is expecting a reference to a subroutine. And in this case, this is how I returned an anonymous subroutine, which would just print out hi, and so that's why we have this hi here. Okay, and these are sort of the more obvious ways to call the function, but there is another one here. So if we call the function and immediately pass it to print, this is list context, as we saw earlier with the local time. And if we call it with the scalar function that forces scalar context, so that's going to be now in scalar context. And this is the nice and nasty part, when we are assigning, creating a hash, and then there is a key value pair, and the function is in the value, and sort of we were expecting that it will return a scalar, but this actually is list context. Okay, and because in our case list context just returns an empty list here, so this creation of hash will get a key and nothing here, and that's why we also get this odd number of elements in hash assignment. I think that is a warning. Okay, so I have to be careful with this idea, because sometimes the intention is not exactly what understood there. Okay, so what is the other function? So this how many it can be even nicer, even more precise. So you know that if you call func, you can assign it to a number of scalar variables in a list context. Now this is list context actually, right? But we actually assign two different scalars. So we are expecting, whoever wrote this code, that this func will return two values, one to the x1 and one to the x2. And so we can use the how many function inside the func, how many that we can get from want, and it will tell us that we are expecting exactly two values. Or when it's called in void context, it will tell us that we are expecting 0 value. Or when we are assigning it to a scalar, we are expecting 1. Or if it's a list of one element, then it's again 1. List of 3 elements, then it's 3, of course. And if we are calling it in some kind of a list context, then it will just be undefined. So this is going to be how many will return undef, and here I'm using the defined or in order to print out the word undefined, so we won't get a warning here just because me printing out undef. So that's it. The funny thing is that I used this module many years ago and completely forgot about it. Maybe at that time the harmony wasn't even there. I'm not sure. But I used the other part, the want part, in some code that I have on CPAN. Anyway, I hope that this was interesting to you, and you'll be able to use this some code of you. And if you like the video, then please do the regular thing, subscribe to the channel, like the video, share it with other people, and so on. So see you next time.